Lab 6, Atmospheric Systems, Hurricanes. In this lab, we're going to take a look at Hurricane Katrina's flooding of New Orleans. This lab will walk you through an interactive multimedia presentation concerning the effects of a hurricane on a major cityscape. We'll look at the surrounding landscape in terms of physical geography to try to understand how and why certain areas of the city were affected so differently. A couple years ago, I went to New Orleans and drove through some of the most heavily affected areas of Katrina's flooding. Many of the homes were still boarded up and businesses closed. This was a major catastrophe to hit the city. Please follow all the instructions carefully. If you have any questions, please hop on Discord or email me or hop on Canvas and post in the discussion help section. So in the first part of this lab, I want you to go to this website made by Dan Swenson. It's a multimedia and interactive timeline of Katrina and New Orleans. So click the start and it will walk you through this interactive multimedia. The layout is graphical in the top part and it has contextual information below with timeline navigation down here with the blue line and the yellow dots. The yellow dot is where you are on the timeline. This interactive multimedia starts at the night of Sunday, August 28th, 2005. This is when Katrina started moving in to the city of New Orleans. Okay. To advance to the next part of the slide, click the next button graphic or the arrow. So as you can see here, there was a funneling of water pressure as the hurricane pushed in and caused water to come into the intercoastal waterway. These industrial canals are man-made, the waterways and the canals, and they link the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. If you want to go back, you can click the back button. You'll see this is the layout of the city of New Orleans with Lake Pontchartrain to the north, Lake Bourget to the east, and then wetlands to the south and eventually the Gulf of Mexico. So go through here, look at the graphics, understand what it's saying. For example, in this slide, it's talking about the breaking of the levees and the lower Ninth Ward flooding first. So if you go back to the lab, there are a number of questions here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that deal with information that is provided to you within this interactive multimedia website. So answer in complete sentences, please, and make sure you at least hit the minimum sentences required, if not more. Okay. So what section within the city limits flooded first? And then what caused the city to flood here first? What was it about the canals or the design or the system that caused that to flood first? When Katrina made landfall in New Orleans, how high was the wall of water? In feet. It says so in one of the slides. And then as the storm moved on over the lake, what was the size of the storm surge on the northern shore of Lake Pontchartrain? That's also there in the slides. Now, there's a striking difference between the two numbers concerning water height between the North Shore Lake Pontchartrain and when Katrina made landfall in New Orleans. Why do you think those were different? Think about water falling on the landscape, inundating the landscape. Tie in your knowledge of the hydrosphere and the lithosphere here. Okay, give me why you think it was different. There's no real right or wrong answer unless you start talking about donuts, okay, or beignets, I should say. Okay, so moving on. Once you're done with that interactive multimedia, I want you to think about the landscape around the city of New Orleans, the actual topography or lack thereof of the landscape and the distribution of land cover versus water. Okay, I want you to look at Google Maps, Google Earth, or pull up an atlas. I don't care. We go to here and turn on some satellite imagery and zoom out of San Antonio, where we are, past Houston to New Orleans here. Okay, and there's Lake Pontchartrain. There's other lakes, and then to the south is wetlands, and then the Gulf of Mexico. Okay? So now, again, in this section, I do not want you to focus on the northern and southern parts of the city. I want you to pull out and look at the landscape to the north of the city. What's here? What's there? Then the landscape to the south of the city. What's all down here and what's all there? Think about topography, right? Google Maps even has an option to put terrain on, and you can look at the terrain or lack thereof of terrain. Right? There's a little bit there, right? So again, do not talk about the city in this. I want you to talk about the surrounding landscape. Talk about the lithosphere around the city. It's vastly different. Now, focus on the cityscape for the last part. Why do you think, based on your analysis of the surrounding landscape around the city and what you learned in the interactive multimedia, why do you think the flooding occurred more in the northern part of the city versus the southern part of the city? Compare and contrast natural and man-made features within and around the city limits of New Orleans that were the cause of this difference. So go back and look at the city and look at the surrounding landscape. There are features here to the north that are vastly different than landscape features to the south. The city itself also has features within the city, like levees to protect the city from being flooded by the lake, versus berms and mounds and farmland to the south, between them and the wetlands. So give that a thought and write about 8 or more sentences for that last part. And that's the end of the lab.